am Tim, and welcome to WatchYouWant.com. Thanks for logging on. Today, we are looking at a freak, even by Panerai standards. You are looking at the 2007 Luminor Submersible PAM 193 depth gauge. That's right, it's a Luminor, it's a 47, it's a submersible, and it's a depth gauge all in one. This is the watch that quite literally does it all. You've heard of Swiss Army knives. This is practically a Swiss Army watch. There's a lot to go over here, folks, so I'm going to start with the obvious. This watch has an integrated mechanical depth gauge. Always a dive watch from the times of its combat dive employment with the Italian Navy, the Israeli Navy after the war, the Egyptians, and several other major amphibious combat services around the world. Panerai evolved in the late 1990s as a luxury watch with several dedicated modern dive references, starting with the PAM 24 and the PAM 25 of 1998. But the bottom line is, they never took things to this extreme until 2007. Although not the first to integrate a depth gauge into a mechanical watch, that honor goes to the 1999 IWC GST Deep 1. This model incorporates all the traditional Panerai styling and ergonomic aspects into a depth gauge that is itself certified by the Swiss METAS Meteorological Agency of the federal government of Switzerland. And that's kind of interesting because you may have heard recently that Omega announced its intention to go off the COSC standard, and the certifying agency for the new Omega standard will in fact be METAS. So here you can see Panerai beat them to the punch by approximately 8 years. But the bottom line with this watch is that it is incredibly complicated, technical, and cool. If you're looking for everything in one package, this watch has it. Let me just show you the wrist shot because I can't give you enough of an impression of just how big this thing is. This is like having two legs of the Tritico in one watch. If you're familiar with the Tritico, it's basically the combination of the Panerai Luminor or Panerai Radiomir, combat style dive watch with the Panerai depth gauge, with the Panerai underwater compass. With this watch, Panerai gives you two of the three in a single case, and it is a 47mm submersible, about 20 millimeters thick. This thing sits on your wrist like a fishbowl. Oddly, it's not uncomfortable. As big as it is, it wears comfortably, but it is huge. I'm not fooling you, folks. This thing will not fit under cuffs of any kind. I don't care if you're wearing a clown suit. This watch is a solid tool, professional utility implement. It is no nonsense. But I will say this. If you're going to go to the beach with a watch, you can't do any better than this one. Now, the interesting thing about it is still recognizable as a Luminor. That classic cushion case profile, almost 1-to-1 aspect ratio, the device protecting the crown, a locking lever, just as patented in the early 1950s and employed on the last of the Panerai combat divers. Anyone would recognize this from 100 paces as a Panerai watch, and I gotta be honest, it would probably still cast a shadow on them from 100 paces away. It's that big, but it's easily seen, highly luminous in the dark, legible in the light. All the classic dial features are there, and despite the amount of calibration on the dial, it's still quite clear what time you're looking at. So it's still a practical time-telling watch, and if you're going to go diving, Panerai is realistic about the limits of the human body. This dive watch is rated to 120 meters. Can it go deeper? Absolutely. But in as much as 120 meters is the limit of the calibration, and according to Panerai, the limit of amateur scuba diving, that's the limit of the depth rating on the watch. Better safe than sorry. Now, the traditional modern dive watch unidirectional rotating bezel is present and correct. This one's a little bit unique because unlike some of the other Panerai dive references, it has very large raised indexes on the calibration. It's three-dimensional. It's almost like a very deep relief, and you can almost treat it like the riders on a Bentley bezel, or excuse me, a Bentley. I'm confusing my co-branding. A Breitling bezel. The Breitling riders are very much like the indexes and calibrations on this PAM 193 depth gauge, and this one moves with a very stout ratcheting. You can hear the detents here. This is set it and forget it because quite literally nothing else is going to move it. You don't have to worry about this moving accidentally. This is as solid as they come. Now, the depth gauge itself is mechanically actuated. It's among the very few watches ever built with this complication, along with the GST Deep 1. There was also the Deep 2 and the Deep 3 from IWC. There was the Blancpain X Fathoms and the Jaeger-LeCoultre Master Compressor Extreme Diving Pro Geographic, and that's pretty much it. This watch is a rarity among rarities, and built in 2007, it even has the peace of mind of a COSC Chronometer certification. So that's kind of cool. Although Omega is going to a METAS certification, this watch is perhaps the only one I can think of that will boast both COSC and a METAS certification of some kind. Now, the METAS is on the depth gauge, COSC is on the movement, but it's a kick to get both of those certifications in a single reference. Now, this watch does come on a beautiful textile contrasting stitch strap, long enough to wear over literally any kind of diving suit, or even 3 or 4 diving suits layered. This is about as good as it gets if you want to use the watch for diving. There is plenty of adjustability here, and it actually feels a treat on a bare wrist too. But there's also a rubber strap that comes with it, and this absolutely bomber bank vault-like clasp. That's unique even by Panerai standards. You see a lot of tang buckles, occasionally a deployant, but this almost cam-type lever locking clasp is unique. And right there you can see the classical image of the Panerai SLC, the Soloro Lanto Corsa manned torpedo used by their combat divers in World War II. Like I said, the Tritico reference is not completely unwarranted. This watch does sort of hark back to those days when Panerai was a manufacturer of dive instruments generally, not just watches. Before they made watches, they made dive instruments and marine instruments for the Italian Navy. And this watch sort of recalls that, the Panerai heritage that predates even the watches, and it brings it into the 21st century in a package that an everyday amateur recreational diver can absolutely use. This watch, the Panerai Luminor Submersible PAM 193, is available from watchyouwant.com with extensive factory Panerai accessories, including that alternate strap. You can swap out any of the 26mm straps that you'd use for a 1950 case onto this watch. So if you have a collection of 1950 alternate straps, you're already into Panerai strap swapping, then you're set. You can start with this watch right off the bat. And heck, if you haven't started with Panerai and you want to start with a bang, I can't think of a better way than this bomb-proof, bomb-sized PAM 193 Luminor Submersible depth gauge. Totally unique. Available from watchyouwant.com.